Welcome to the Music Wide Open podcast
The place for an honest and thought-provoking conversation
about music,
business,
life,
technology,
and the future,
for curious music enthusiasts.
and musicians seeking personal growth. I'm Ingolf Wunder.
And I am Paulina Wunder. What is perfection?
There is none. Thank you very much for joining us today, and see you in 3 weeks at the Music Wide Open podcast.
Have no fear of perfection, you will never reach it. Salvador Dali said that. But
It was a smart cookie.
absolutely, he had some big ambitions. I don't remember that quote, but he was something.
I could draw a little bit.
Pretty perfect, I would say. In any case, there must be something, because people chase something. So what does perfection mean for classical musicians? Something, anything.
Well, for classical musicians, it's a big topic because perfection in its bad form is chased way too much. But of course, perfection doesn't exist, as we know, and that's what makes it sad in many cases, because we humans, as you said, we have to chase something. So there is, of course, this kind of need to, if you practice, if you as a classical musician, if you work that much on your muscles, on your fingers, on getting everything right from the tiniest little shade to the quickest scale, then you have to chase something in order to know whether you have reached your goal. So on some level there is such a thing as perfection, but in the artistic whole there is not, because it's a feeling. Like even in sciences, people remember a feeling. It's not something calculated, so there is no perfection.
Some artists, some musicians are obsessed with perfection. At the same time, striving for perfection doesn't have to mean obsession. So therefore, there's so much misunderstanding, because nobody really knows what perfection means.
Yes.
Is it something that I haven't done yet, and therefore I imagine that this is perfection, my goal, or is it my vision of something that appeals to my taste?
That's the question. It's really a duality that we go through. We as humans, I believe, and I'm pretty sure about that by now, that we need some kind of framework or box that you put yourself in, which you of course want to get out of, because you have to, be out of the box in order to be great. But in order to be good at anything, you have to give yourself some certain boundaries to here and no further, or there I want to go and here I don't want to go. So you give yourself directions, which is sort of a goal that you can reach perfectly or not. But probably the whole of an artwork is too complex for the human mind to understand consciously, I guess. So therefore these small things that you can be perfect at are not the most important thing.
That's true. And we know that perfection isn't an objective standard.
Yes.
But is it an internal feeling based on what resonates with you personally?
I think so. But of course, what resonates with you personally depends heavily on your outside world, or if you're not aware of your personal reality, which we covered already and will cover still many times, then you are, or one is very much influenced of what people think about you, in what world you live in, what you want to reach in material ways, because what you want to reach in life, for example, career or whatever, money or whatever it is, then or you imagine a certain path will lead you to that. And this gives you already a constraint as to what you think you should be perfect at. And if you are not aware of that actually humans are very suggestible, if that's the word in English, then you can, fool yourself and think this perfection is what I need and what I want, but you forget the whole and the big picture that art should be.
What I also think that many musicians, classical musicians, give that impression that they strive for perfection because it puts them in a better light
Yeah, they strive so much to perfection that they forget the most important thing in music, which
Exactly.
which in our case was already covered by the greatest minds so many times in the past. So if you would have, if I would be mean, I would say if you would have ears or you would have the right guidance, then you can find the proof very easily that such perfection as we nowadays assume is important is actually not important at all. But we live in a world where,
Well, classical musicians, let's put it this way, classical musicians actually are as well expected from others, especially in the music business, I would say. So musicians are expected to be perfect, whatever it means, and flawless. And usually those people who expect others to be perfect and flawless are themselves far from perfection.
yeah.
Far from perfect.
Sure, and this goes also from the listener's side, or let's put it this way, not only listeners, but the gatekeepers most of all, because those that decide who is where and what is being done. Those are also very much influenced of what I mentioned before, the outer surrounding of that person. Like you expect something because it's, in German we have a word called Hörgewohnheit, which is like you're used to hearing something specific. And this is so strong that you then think, just because you heard a great recording when you were 20 and you thought that's the standard, and at that time maybe your mentor or the one that you looked up to said that's the perfect thing to do. It's so ingrained in your brain that you think that's the way how to play that piece. So you pattern match it to that particular experience that you had back then, and that's your perfect, which might not be the perfect thing, which doesn't exist, as we said, but near perfection, let's put it this way. It's really difficult.
It is difficult, and it puts even more pressure on classical musicians. I say that as a person who is not a classical musician, because
but somebody who understands it very well,
and someone who understands a little bit more than an average person. Yes, this comes out of my observation. If somebody is incapable of hearing the music, he hears only mistakes.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people that the classical musicians are exposed to, such people a lot.
Well, in fact, you see, the proof actually that there's a code in music is, of course, that there's certain natural ratios and balances that on the compositional layer it's very easy to spot a mistake, because the human nervous system sort of knows what should be coming or not.
But that's the first thing that one understands as well, because you hear a piece once and you sort of know it.
But the most important thing, and I think this skill is rather not so common, is that to hear if that's a mistake that is important, learned, or that just happened because somebody had a musical thought or some spur of the moment thing that just happens to cause a mistake. And if you don't know that, then you think, it's a mistake, it's not so good, right? And
exactly, and then it kills everything. But here we have the technical perfection versus musical perfection. Because I would say
technical perfection, by the way, in terms of speed and precision, exists, of course.
Yeah,
technical perfection, but it's not
robots
musical
can
perfection.
do that as well.
But technical perfection, that's why I said instead of speed and precision, because what people forget is that voicing, legato, melody, music making is much more technique as a quick scale. And if that's not there, many people don't hear that. And it's also technique, so that's why it's a funny topic.
I would say that sometimes one needs some, in quotation marks, dirt in music in order to make this music better, closer to perfection, more living and less sterile and less dead. And what comes to my mind here is an anecdote. We mentioned her already several times in this series.
And will still.
And probably will. Maria Callas, in one of her interviews, recalled a particular recording session after her summer break. She was in a great mood. She was mentally rested, physically rested. Her vocal cords were powerful. The voice was fresh. And while she was singing or recording, so in the process, she was pleased with the result. happy about this, that she can execute everything perfectly, technically flawless. And then she made a break. She went to speak to her record producer, the famous Walter Legg, who had some clue. And he was not so pleased. And then she realized that she, due to the fact that she probably focused so much on the technical side and the power of her voice and everything, she forgot all the colors of emotions connected to the character she was singing. So technically it was perfect, but it was not perfect in the sense of musical expression.
Yeah. And that's somebody of her class. Like, imagine now, people nowadays are on average far from that.
Well, they don't have
level,
even such record producers that would point out this kind of thing, like, hey, well,
but it's exactly the thing. I mean, music, it's a bit of a stupid phrase, but music isn't meant to be flawless. I mean, it is, because life isn't flawless.
Exactly.
and it's in balance, yes, and systems and self-organizing things, they find balance, but it's not perfect, never. Nature isn't perfect either. So we are chasing something that doesn't exist with perfection, right? And this is nowadays to such an extent that expressive deadness or musical deadness isn't even spotted anymore by many people, because it's so normal that a mistake in the dead playing is much more important than something amazing musically with some mistakes. Yes, that happened to Cocteau, to Kochalski, to Friedman, to whomever, to Horowitz, to Richter, to all of those greats on the piano. Yes, so that's a real thing that we have to come back to in order to save that art form, that this interpretation.
I feel that the reason why young musicians focus so much on this technical perfection, that's a paradox maybe, but it's very difficult, but it's easier to achieve than musical perfection.
Yes, it is.
They focus so much because they know that they are often judged upon the mistakes they make. So of course there are so many competitions, music competitions, thousands of them, and a lot of jury members, since there are no really clear rules how to judge a piece of music, because you cannot even do that really, they count mistakes.
Yes,
it's
that has been started I don't know, maybe before I knew about it, but mid-20th century for sure, there were these famous jury members, which I will not name now, that started this mistake counting. And it's actually quite sad, because the great Dina Joffe, whom I recently met, said something very heartbreaking, because she had one interview with a participant once, and she hopefully excuses me if I misquoted a little bit, but the essence of the story was that the participant, after a competition where he didn't pass the first round or second round, I don't remember, said in a heartbreaking way actually that when he then played without the competition stress, it was much better. And when Dina Joffe pointed that out, he said that, yeah, but in the competition I played, like many do, by the way, the way that most of the jury members will like it. So in other words, these people check how the average of the jury members play, or let's say how most of them play, and what most of them will probably like and play them the way that most probably will let them win, which is idiotic, because
it makes it toothless completely.
But this is what happens, unfortunately, and it's really sad, because it kills exactly that what we are talking about. It kills the artistic spirit, and that has to be not planned, it has to be felt. Music has to be felt in order to deliver emotion. You have to feel things, so it means it has to be natural to you. So if you play something...
I would put it this way, authenticity over perfection.
Yes, absolutely.
Because then it's perfect, then it's real.
It's perfect for you. I mean, it's perfect for your, maybe, this is it's a slippery slope.
There is a bigger chance that it will resonate with other people, because it comes from within.
That's for sure.
And it's not calculated.
That's for sure. What many great professors and jury members rightly will now say, that's also a danger, because some people just simply don't know enough yet in order to be authentic for themselves, then they will ruin whatever piece of music they play, which is true. Also a common concern. But that goes into the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? If you don't know that you don't know anything,
that's true.
Then,
yes.
Okay.
Then you overestimate yourself. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you always have a risk, but definitely authenticity is the winner always. There's
another thing, because people are very cautious. Not all. A lot of people are very cautious, and it applies also to musicians. Some are afraid to show their authenticity, and then after some time they forget what is their authenticity.
Yeah, because fear rules. I mean, we come back to fear. It's the fear of making it, of having to pay the bills, of doing, this is that ground fear of not wasting your life in order to maybe make a mistake that you shouldn't make, in order not to get a concert or not to win a prize and not to make a career. That is the fear. And this is what this wrong perfection is based on. Like you said something very true before, that the problem is that we don't know really what's the real thing to judge in a competition, for example. And I know that for a fact that many jury members actually have trouble with that.
Well, competitions, this is just one subject.
Yeah, okay, but this is the same kind of thing.
It can apply to anything in the music
yeah, exactly.
world.
No, but I meant since we are talking about classical music, especially in that field where it's so much about tiny little differences of interpretation and all these things that are supposedly making genius, which they do, but people don't really know what's the rules of, for example, what is authentic, what is actually really musically good and what not. So, but they know what's in the score, and they know if a missed note was there or not. So that, therefore, in the last decades, it became, on average, again, there's always good examples, but on average, normal to judge these actually not so important things and elevate them to a superior position, while they are not. Technical things like if you miss the note, or how quick you play, how precise you play, they are means to help the music speak. And if the music is dead or doesn't do what it should do, then it's meaningless whether you play all notes and quick enough. And this is what people don't anymore value as much as they did in the past.
Therefore, since there are no clear rules as well, it can be something blocking, an obstacle for musicians to actually go forward musically.
Yes, and perfection is a fear, absolutely, in disguise. I mean, it's a mask sort of for controlling things that you don't really understand. It's insecurity in a way. It's a prison.
So what would be an ideal scenario? How one gets rid of that trap?
Well, I think the main issue is that students have a very clear understanding and view what they want to reach in terms of technical abilities, in terms of no mistake played, in terms of how quick they want to play and all of that things. But they don't have a clear objective as to what they actually should do musically. What is a phrase really saying? What is a certain combination of harmonics and of melody, and saying what kind of feeling should it portray? And so basically play what we already covered so often, and will still so often, is that they play musical expressions and not tones. And this is the problem, that they don't know exactly what they should reach there, and therefore they go to the smallest common denominator, which is technique, which is playing without mistake, and there they know what they need to reach and chase that.
Well, they probably, of course, fear failure, and they fear as well judgment.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the problem is exactly that on average, again, there are very good examples as well, but not many, unfortunately. But on average, that musical side, which is in music, that's why it's called music, the most important, is not given to students anymore. That North Star is not given. The technical North Star, the career North Star is given. That's why they are chasing, but not the musical one. But in order to have the musical one, you have to actually trial and error.
Career-wise, they as well don't know what to do because they don't know how it works. So that's another.
That's true. But theoretically, they are okay. You are totally right. But they are told that there is a logic way of going to the top. That's why they're going there. So let's.
And they imagine that this means perfection. This is what I see, at least from my.
That's correct. But what I meant by the North Star that is missing is if somebody would give that direction to the student where she needs to go musically, not exactly how he or she has to play. Very important, because one teacher cannot know how a person should play because he or she, the teacher, is not that person.
Yes.
So, but if you give the certain framework of how it should, what it should not be, and what it should contain, like as basic rules, then you give the framework that the student can really try. And that's the point, because he has to jump into the cold water in order to find his way.
At first glance, what I'm going to say now has absolutely nothing to do with music, nothing to do with classical music, but it has. I will explain. There is a famous quote by, I'm not sure at the moment, I think co-founder of LinkedIn. If you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you've launched it too late. It's a famous quote in that tech world. And you can actually apply this philosophy to almost any new endeavor in real life, not just startups or tech products. Because the core principle is to start before you feel completely ready. Use early feedback to learn, or any feedback to learn, and then iterate quickly rather than waiting for perfection or thinking about perfection. So in other words, you have to embrace imperfection.
As long as it has the core, what it should have.
Yes, of course, but let's say in a very early stage, it doesn't even have to, because you still can look for it and then you discover it and then you have it.
That's correct, but the core, for example, in terms of LinkedIn, I don't know if that's the quote, but LinkedIn as a platform to connect working people, let's call it this way. How it will do that, that's not known, but that it should do that is sort of known, right?
It's secondary whose quote that is. It's about the quote itself, because we need to let go of perfection. Many people delay starting, even being authentic, by the way, because they fear judgment, or because they want everything to be flawless. Yeah. And in fact, when one thinks about it, real growth comes from learning through action and not endless preparation or being in this insecurity zone, like I think this will please this group of people. And because of this fear, coming back to musicians, because of this fear, musicians or young musicians make or play something in an uninteresting way, or say things that are uninteresting, that have been said multiple times by others, because...
Not to do anything wrong.
Exactly.
Whatever it is, yes.
Because that is sort of perfect for them, although it's not.
But I completely agree with that. The reason why I said that about the North Star, or the where it should go, is exactly that's the problem in music, right? And I wanted to bridge that one. Like, yes, the product can also change over time. If you see that the product is not
but then one pivots it. Yes, then you pivot.
But once this North Star, so what the thing should do is known, then the way to it is pivoted by this feedback loop, right?
True.
That's the point. And this is absolutely true. In music is not a problem, and I know that also from fellow jury members. Hold on, I'm so rarely injuries, but that exactly due to the missing North Star in music, which is musicality, which is music making, they don't know which feedback to trust. So that feedback loop is a problem, because one will tell you this, the other one will tell you something completely different, and then the student doesn't know how to play.
And then in the end you think like, I'm not perfect, I'm far from being perfect.
And the product is dead music.
Not only this, because I believe that the fear of imperfection can actually lead to stage fright.
On top of it, yeah, absolutely.
And also not performing in a natural way.
Of course, absolutely. It really, it's very personal how that actually then manifests on stage. Let's say some are very confident and still that. Yeah, but this feedback loop, which is so important, but it's then you have to, as a student, and I was in that position as well, you have to be very sensitive as to whose feedback you trust. And that's the chicken egg problem, because if you don't know something, it's a feeling or it's outside the rational mind to know whether something is good for you or not, because you don't know it yet. So how can you know if that feedback is a good one or not? It's a feeling.
Feeling, and maybe not thinking too much, not overthinking too much. And if you have too many feedbacks, you then start to think too much.
Yes. Yeah, overthinking is always a killer.
And there is another famous quote, to achieve great things, two things are needed, a plan and not quite enough time. It is attributed to Leonard Bernstein, although it's most probably not him, it's rather Albert Hubbard, who was an American writer and artist and philosopher at the beginning of the 20th century. And this quote expresses actually a pretty similar thing. The pressure can help us focus and avoid procrastination and push us to be more creative, more productive, and in a way more perfect, and achieve these great things.
But because we really don't know what we're capable of until we do it.
Yes.
We always have the fear of saying, nah, it's too much, I cannot anymore, and then you still can. So there's always, some people can even do a lot when they're already sort of exhausted. Mentally or physically, because you still have what springs to mind is these professional cyclists at the Tour de France. They sometimes have even that feeling of going beyond that. They have this state of where they're already so exhausted that they cannot anymore, and then they find again that gear and again that gear, and this is what what then makes a champion, right?
Yes.
But we all have that in us. It's just about that
activation
and belief that it's actually possible. It's not exactly connected, but a little bit, is that perfection is a mental construct. Mm-hmm. One has to be aware of that. Like it exists sort of only as an idea.
Yes.
It's not a reality in that sense, because if you put it to classical music, then the perfection that a Chopin had in mind when he wrote that and played it, first of all, we don't know at all what that really was. We have some writings and letters and, of course, students that passed it on. But again, it's second generation or so. So we don't know what that perfection actually meant for him, what the reality...
Well, again, we are here coming to the taste, these things that I've mentioned before. What is perfect to me, just because I cannot achieve that, or I imagine that it would be perfect once
That's true.
I achieve it.
My point that I'm trying to make, maybe not that good yet, but is that Chopin, in his reality, for example, had something, probably also, he's also human, so he also was striving to reach perfection, whatever it meant for him, right? But what the outcome of that was, we don't know. And he had a different reality around him with different values, most likely, with different surroundings and everything. So we don't know what that actually meant. So now we play that old music. It's not it's beautiful music, but it's music that has been created in a different reality, and we have it now in our reality. Of course, that can be and is often misused for a kind of pass to do whatever you want, because yes, it's now now we live in our reality. It's like that. But of course that's wrong, because that musical essence, this what actually should be the North Star.
It's timeless.
Exactly, and I mean, we genetically and as humans we don't evolve so quickly, so probably the human emotions and all the things were pretty similar in the 19th century as they are now.
Absolutely, I would say a couple of thousands of years
exactly.
ago as well.
So that's why it's about that, and I think this shift of focus in this interpretative world is absolutely necessary in order to keep and safeguard that art form.
I would like to go back to one thought here. about jumping to the waters that you actually don't know, and you take risks because, again, here we've just talked about it. Some musicians are very, let's put it this way, they try to be always on the secure side while they are playing.
Yeah, most of them.
And one sees that because they slow down just before something difficult is happening in music, and they're not going all in. Exactly. Because the mistakes can come, and then these are these mistakes that are easy to count.
Exactly.
So I would like to talk about this a little bit, because actually these risky choices sometimes make perfection.
Yes, in the greater sense, definitely, because great music, and this is not me who's saying that, the greatest musicians of the last 120 years that we know talking about that topic say that great music is taking risks. There's no, you have to shape phrases and music with, daring choices, like the rubato has to be exactly this way, then you can't wait for that note because it would kill everything, even if it's technically very difficult, but you just have to go for it. That's risk because it can go wrong. And as with sportsmen so often as well, the best sportsmen in the world make 50-55% of shots and are the greatest sportsmen. So because they take risks. And in music we don't do that anymore, although it should be, because as I said, the goal is the musical expression and not the wrong note. Therefore, there's no choice to make. You have to do it. And if it works, amazing. If it doesn't work, okay, it was a mistake. So what? And that was the mindset of the greatest musicians of the past.
That's true. They saw a piece as a whole.
Yes.
They didn't stop somewhere in order to then impress with some quick scales just because they stopped music milliseconds just before.
But the perception of those people also, again, on average, because not everything was great in the past. Obviously, many things are now better. But on average, the people listening to this music in the past had this big picture as well, much more. So they knew if something was amazing, even if a mistake happened. And I know that for a fact, because, a friend of ours in Vienna, who unfortunately passed away in her 90s, was friends with Richard Strauss and with Wilhelm Backhaus and all that. Like, we know personal conversations with these people. So, and this is actually the music that we play. And so it's not made up. It's just people have to get back to that mindset, not only single people, but it starts with single people, but hopefully the society will get back to that mindset.
Well, it depends. It's a difficult subject here.
I know.
But yes, this is an interesting...
No, but what I also want to say here, which is very important, audiences remember feelings. Like, this is still true. Just if you are not exposed to that en masse, you just you feel also something that people are very good at making up something they feel anyway. So even if you have that music 10 times in a row, then you will, it was nice music, so I feel something. But if you really make people feel something with music, this is what they remember. Goosebumps, breathtaking, phrases, something that really makes them stop thinking about the daily life just because it was so beautiful. This emotional...
I agree with this, but it also depends on the people, because if you have someone, and there are such people in the audience as well that are actually, let's put it this way, pseudo-sophisticated enough to know the music, so they recognize when the mistakes are coming, and then they are switched off in terms of musical understanding. They just count the mistakes as well. Not literally maybe, but so their focus is somewhere else. So it really depends on the person.
But that's a good point. We are of course touching here a wider topic of society getting numb, less sensitive,
which is actually unfortunately a natural development, because this is what surrounds us every day. The noise, the noise pollution.
Exactly.
It sort of dampens our hearing.
Yes, if you're not careful, this is like if you eat badly, then your body will deteriorate. And if you hear bad things or too loud things or too coarse things or something, then
you get used to it.
Your brain will just lose the ability to actually, or it will take, not maybe lose, but it would take a detox and some time to rebuild these mechanisms.
Yet again, not the first time in this series, we're going back to nature and to balance.
Yeah, exactly. The surprise that needs to be there for something to be great, because if we would expect everything that's coming, then it's not good anymore. But this surprise factor has to be in the natural balance of what I call natural music making, but in the balance that is in nature, that is in us. And let's also not forget that quantum mechanics, I know it's in very tiny things, but still it rejects absolutes. So even particles behave unpredictable in a way. So reality, as we know it, is probabilistic in some way. So I know this is a bit deep already, but I think the quintessence of what I want to say about this perfection or near perfection of humans is that exactly there should be the surprise factor plus the natural human framework. And I think if people would start focusing on this more than whether somebody played the wrong note or not, we would be one big step further.